Baker Mayfield has a really tough matchup against the Rams. We'll tell you why you should sit him in your fantasy leagues next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us the #1 sports podcast network. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. He is the Fantasy Football Hall of Famer, Michael Fabiano. And on today's show, we're taking a look at the top starts and sits going into Week 12. Not too many regular season games left, so we got to get some wins. Let's start at the quarterback position. And I want to actually start with some quarterbacks that you're sitting because I think that's more notable than the guys that you're starting. Baker Mayfield. They're playing the Rams on Sunday Night Football in a game that should be a lot of fun. You would think this would be a high-scoring game between Baker and Stafford. But why are you sitting him?
I mean, it's just the stats. And, Baker and the Buccaneers were in a shootout last week, and he didn't really have a great game. He was, 15, 16 points. But listen to this trend in terms of the Rams defense against quarterbacks at home. Only one has beaten them for more than 10.4 fantasy points at SoFi Stadium this year. And that includes Daniel Jones, who's a top 10 fantasy quarterback, and Sam Darnold, who has been a pretty good fantasy quarterback this season. So it's not a great matchup. And Baker's not been great lately either. He's had fewer than 17 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games, including 2 with fewer than 12 points. And I love Baker. I love him. Maybe he gets Chris Godwin back this week. Doesn't look like Bucky Irving will be back this week. But the matchup and the numbers say that Baker's a fade.
It's so hard to sit him. I mean, everything you're saying is right, and he's probably going to be a decent QB2 this week.
That's what I would think.
But is there any chance that this just turns into a shootout? It's a big game.
Listen, man, every game, well, except for games that include the Jets, but I guess you can't even say that because look at what happened against Pittsburgh in the opener. So you never know. Like, there's always a chance that a game could go bananas. You know what I mean? But then there's also games that go completely sideways. Remember Packers, Eagles a few weeks ago?
Sure,
I mean, what the heck? We all thought there were going to be points in that game, and there certainly were not. So it's possible, but I am a slave to the numbers, and the numbers suggest that this is not a great week to start Baker Mayfield.
All right, how about Trevor Lawrence against this Cardinals team that, just allowed Brock Purdy to throw all over them?
Mm-hmm.
The Cardinals defense has been in rough shape the last couple of weeks. Can you start Lawrence with any kind of confidence?
Yeah, he's more of a QB2 for me this week. And, he had just 15 points last week. He's got 25 points combined in his last 2 games. And he hasn't thrown for more than 220 yards in a game in each of his last 3. And even though the Cardinals did give it up to Purdy last week, overall, their defense is giving up 13 points per game to road quarterbacks. So quarterbacks who are facing them in the desert. So once again, the numbers suggest, and remember, we don't know if Brian Thomas Jr. is playing. We know that Travis Hunter's not playing. The Jaguars offense could be at less than 100%. I still don't trust Lawrence as more than a super flex option this week.
All right, one more quarterback I want to talk about potentially sitting, and that's Daniel Jones, who's been unbelievable this year. This is a top 5 quarterback by almost any metric, coming off a bye week. Now, I know they play the Chiefs in Kansas City. What are you doing with Daniel Jones?
I mean, this is one of those games, too, where you could think maybe it just, turns into a shootout. But Kansas City's defense is good. I mean, they're really good. They haven't allowed a single quarterback, Marcus, to beat them for more than 16.8 points at Arrowhead. Okay, and we're not talking about curtain jerkers either. Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson both scored fewer than 12 fantasy points in Kansas City this season. So I have a league where I have to play Daniel Jones because I had Jaden Daniels and I have to play him. And what's on the waiver wire is not very appealing. But I think most people don't have to make that decision. If you have another quarterback, Jacoby Brissett, I'd play him over Daniel Jones all day long this week.
can't believe we're here with Jacoby Brissett. I mean, he's been a QB1 every game that he's played. So
he's been awesome.
Yeah,
he's been great. I mean, and he set the record for the most completions in a game last week.
That's going to be a fun trivia
47.
night thing. I can't wait. Let's talk about some
57.
I know.
That's amazing.
And of course, it's when Marvin Harrison Jr. isn't playing, which is
crazy.
Jared Goff against the Giants. He had an awful game last week against the Eagles. Can you start him with confidence here in this one?
Yeah, and Goff was a sit-em for us last week. I think that was kind of easy because, again, the matchup was not great. But this week, he's at home. The Giants have allowed 6 quarterbacks to beat them for 20-plus points. 5 have hit that mark since week 6. They're giving up the second most points per game to quarterbacks. This is an easy one. It's a no-brainer. Jared Goff is a very good play.
What about Matt Stafford going up against Tampa Bay? I know this Tampa Bay defense can be up and down. You playing him?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. And last week was not a good week for him. He had only 13 points. I thought he'd be much better. Seattle's defense is very good, though. But before that, 26-plus in each of his previous 3. And the Buccaneers have given up an average of over 22 points per game to quarterback since week 8. So they have been vulnerable to position lately. Stafford's been on fire. People are talking about him as the MVP, which is, I mean, it's warranted, but wow, no one saw that coming. I'm playing Matt Stafford. How much do I feel confident in Matthew Stafford in one of my dynasty leagues, the one that I just despise and will probably not play in next year? I traded a first-round pick to get Stafford because I was that desperate. And I know he's an older quarterback, but I'm in it to win it this year.
All right, let's move over to some running backs. I want to talk about Kenneth Walker. He looked awesome last week against the Rams. You played him this week against the Titans. I know that backfield can be incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, I am, and I didn't like Walker last week, and there's no reason to like Walker last week because he had a good game since September, and the Rams were, the toughest running back defense in the entire league, and unfortunately, fantasy football happens. But you've got 4 teams on a bye, you've got injuries, but after scoring over 20 points last week against the Rams, and now going up against the Titans, who've given up 16-plus points to 6 running backs since week 3, they're giving up right around 5 yards a carry. I got to be honest with you, Marcus. I mean, Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet are both playable this week. I have Walker ranked higher.
How about the other running back in this game, Tony Pollard? You starting him this week? I know it's been up and down for him this season.
It's been mostly down. I mean, think about it too. Like when we came into the season, Pollard was one of those running backs that you were thinking, if I wait on a running back and I go with a lot of wide receivers, I can get him as my running back too, and I feel pretty good. You don't feel pretty good right now. You feel pretty lousy. In fact, Tajay Spears has been the better running back for the better part of the last 3 or 4 weeks, and Seattle's only allowed 4 running backs to beat them for more than 13.4 points. So if I'm playing a Titans running back, I don't love either one of them, but maybe Spears is the better option, and you would think this is going to be a negative game script as well.
What about Travis Etienne? He was somebody who had a really rough stretch there, to start the month. Are we back to trusting him in our fantasy lineups?
Yeah, he's bounced back, over 51 fantasy points combined in his last 3 games. He had 19.3 last week, and that was while losing some work to Bashal Tutin, who's a little bit banged up. The Cardinals, while they've been tough at home against quarterbacks, not against running backs, when you look at the entirety of the season, 14-plus fantasy points to 7 different running backs, including 5 since week 5. So I'm going to stick with Etienne this week, even though he's been really up and down.
I want to ask you about DeAndre Swift because the Steelers defense has been, again, very up and down to running backs. Chase Brown had a big week last week. DeAndre Swift at home against the Steelers. Can you start him?
I mean, you can. I would temper expectations. I think he's more of a flex or a low RB2. Do you know that his fantasy numbers have dropped in 5 straight games? And he had 9 points last week. And Kyle Monengai is not getting more touches, but he's getting touches that are important. He scored a touchdown in one of the last couple of games where Swift maybe would have otherwise gotten it. Since week 6, the Steelers defense has allowed just 2 touchdowns to running backs, and they're giving up right around 17 points per game in the position. I mean, that's not great if you have DeAndre Swift. In fact, Swift is someone that if I had the opportunity to trade him away because he's got a really bad matchup slate the rest of the season, I would probably do that now.
One more running back I want to ask you about, Alvin Kamara. We've got 4 teams on a bye this week. Any chance he bounces back this week against Atlanta?
Yes, but again, 4 teams off, and I look at the numbers, and I feel like you're starting the name and not the production. He's failed to score more than 9.5 points in 4 of his last 6. He's been held to single digits 5 times since week 3. But then when you look at the stats, you're like, well, Atlanta can give it up to running backs. Well, they've given it up to Jonathan Taylor, who's awesome, Christian McCaffrey, who's awesome, and Devon Achane, who's awesome. And then otherwise, like, there hasn't been another running back who's had like a huge game against them. So if I start Kamara and I'm in a league where I have to, I'm hoping for like 12 to 14 points. And that's not the Alvin Kamara that we've all come to know and love. This is kind of the Alvin Kamara of 2025. So start him and temper expectations. I know people need to play him out there, but this is not the same guy.
All right, let's talk about some receivers that you should have in your lineups for week 12, including Zay Flowers. We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement of this sports season, whether you're following the NFL, the NBA, or both. There has never been a better time to jump in on the action. And if you haven't tried it yet, Prize Picks is the simplest way to play. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats, and if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play Prize Picks anywhere that they operate, including California, Texas, and Georgia. I love that I can pick my favorite players like, CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, to see how my predictions play out. Plus, the new stacks feature is a game changer. You can pick more on like Steph Curry's points, threes, and assists all in the same lineup. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us the #1 sports podcast network. We are breaking down the top starts and sits going into week 12. Fabs, let's go to the wide receiver position. I want to start with Zay Flowers, who has kind of quietly been good this season. And I know they've had some injuries at quarterback and Lamar Jackson's been up and down. This is a Jets defense that doesn't have Sauce Gardner anymore, obviously. Can you start him with confidence here?
I would, and I would try to trade for him too, because really at this point, you can try to trade for any Raven who has fantasy value because they have a cakewalk of a schedule, including 2 games against the Bengals. But Flowers' numbers are not huge, but he's given you 11 plus in 4 straight games. He's always in double digits. And you look at the Jets defense, 9th most points per game allowed to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. And they've also allowed 4 wide receivers to beat them for over 19 points since week 7. So I'm starting Zay Flowers. I'm starting all of my prominent Ravens in this game and moving forward.
What about some other receivers? What about Jamison Williams? Is he somebody that you can start this week? I know we've been talking about him a lot on this podcast.
That's my dude, man. Yeah,
it feels like this is the week.
He's been on fire. 16 plus points in 3 straight games and 4 of his last 5 overall. He's got the Giants this week. They've given up the 6th most points per game to receivers, and they've allowed 14 or more fantasy points to 14 receivers. 14, including 6 who've gone over 20. So, if you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams this weekend, you are licking your chops. And then, the same goes for Tedero McMillan, who I admittedly did not love last week. I didn't like the matchup. And as you mentioned earlier on the podcast, they started moving him around a little bit where AJ Terrell couldn't follow him. And now he's got the Niners. The Niners defense has allowed 13 plus points to 12 wide receivers. 7 have gone over 17 points, and 1 went over 30, and that was Michael Wilson last week. So, Tedero McMillan is in a great spot to succeed. And what I feel is kind of like a strange Monday night game, like Panthers on Monday night in week 12, but that's what we got.
I kind of don't hate it, though. Carolina's been like sneaky fun.
No, I know. I get it. Yeah, it
just feels weird though, right? Like,
I'm not saying that like it's they're not worth of it, because look, they're a good team, but it's just weird, right? We're talking in week 12 and the Panthers are on Monday Night Football, but they've been good.
Well, what's really weird is if the Buccaneers lose to the Rams on Sunday Night Football, Carolina is going to be playing for first place on that Monday Night Football game, which is wild in that NFC
Crazy.
South. Yeah. Let's talk about some receivers that we don't feel quite as great about, and DK Metcalf is one. Aaron Rodgers dealing with a left wrist injury, so his non-throwing hand. Now, the Bears could potentially be getting back Pro Bowl cornerback Jalen Johnson in this one. We'll see about Kyler Gordon. They have no linebackers in this game, but is Metcalf somebody that we can start here in a huge game for the Steelers?
I mean, a lot of people will have to, but I mean, look at the numbers. Like, it makes me nuts because I liked Metcalf coming into the season, and he had a really good start. Yeah. He was averaging like 16 points per game. And I don't know what happened, but he's fallen off a cliff. Fewer than 10 points in 3 straight games in 4 of his last 5. As you mentioned, Rodgers is banged up. And like the Bears defense hasn't been overly tough on wide receivers. But I mean, Metcalf hasn't been able to exploit good matchups for the last month. So, he's probably
I think if you have DK Metcalf in your fantasy leagues, you want Mason Rudolph to start this week because Rudolph will stand in the pocket and throw the ball down the field. And Rodgers just won't do that. And I think now that he's got a wrist injury, I wonder if he's going to be even more skittish in the pocket.
So it's a troublesome situation, unfortunately. And he just is not he went from a player that you're starting every week to one you're like, darn, do I got to start DK Metcalf? And the same goes for Xavier Worthy, who was fantastic down the stretch last year. But ever since Rashee Rice came back, and I think we kind of saw this coming, I mean, his numbers have been kind of lousy. And he's averaging 8.6 points per game on the season. I got a league where I tried to trade him for Wan'Dale Robinson, and nobody wants him. Even though the quarterback is Patrick Mahomes, it doesn't matter anymore. Nobody wants Xavier Worthy, kind of like they don't want Justin Jefferson or the guy I'm going to talk about next. But the matchup this week for Worthy also isn't great. The Colts have given up the fewest points per game to opposing perimeter receivers in the last 4 weeks. Some of that could be who they've played, but I don't love Xavier Worthy, this week. He has just not lived up to expectations. And then
I got real quick. I've got Worthy in a 16-team league because you know how much I love Worthy.
I know.
And you can't start him. And I think number one, Rashee Rice is getting more targets, but number two, I just think he's really banged up. He has a torn labrum that's not going to get better as the season goes on, and he's been dealing with an ankle injury that he's missed a lot of practice time with. I just don't see it happening this year. I could see it in 2026 when he's fully healthy. He's almost droppable now in most leagues.
It's amazing the number of big name wide receivers that we can't trust right now. Yeah. And that includes Justin Jefferson. Now, I'm not going to tell you to sit Justin Jefferson or Marcus would have kicked me off the podcast, but I can tell you to sit Jordan Addison, who has been to sit him for like a month now. Ever since JJ McCarthy came back, I'm out. McCarthy, he's completing 50% of his passes last week. He's been brutal. And literally Jordan Addison, if you look at the numbers that Jordan Addison has produced or not produced with JJ McCarthy, he's droppable in redrafts. He's droppable, but people still playing him. I'm in the Kings Classic, and my team had the highest point total 3 weeks ago. And since McCarthy has come back, it has gone into the damn toilet because I have to play Jordan Addison. It's a 14-team league, and I'm getting bupkis from him. So if you're in a redraft league and maybe you have a little depth at wide receiver, you could try to trade him. People are trying to trade Addison to me. I'm like, are you crazy? No, I don't think so. You send me $50 in Venmo, I still wouldn't take him. I don't want him. He's terrible. Well, he's not terrible. JJ McCarthy's terrible. So I'm not playing Addison. Listen, I know that, you think, oh, well, he's only played this many games, and I get it. I know a bust quarterback when I see one, and I see Zach Wilson 2.0, pal.
Let's go over to the tight end position. First of all, do you know which player has scored the most fantasy points in a game for a tight end in NFL history? Do you have any guess?
In a game in NFL history? I mean, is it a big name or is it going to come as a complete shot?
No, it's a big name. It's a big name.
See, so I'm thinking Gronkowski or Tony Gonzalez.
Older.
Kellen Winslow, Sr.
Bingo. Yes. Okay. November 22nd, 1981. He had 13 catches for 144 yards and 5 touchdowns. That record might go down this week. Dallas Goedert playing the Cowboys, 425 on Fox. Any chance that you're starting Goddard this week?
Yeah, I definitely am. There's no question about that. By the way, quick story. One of the first NFL games that I ever watched was that game, San Diego Chargers, Miami Dolphins in the playoffs. You remember that game? It's one of the greatest games ever. If you love football and you haven't seen that game, go on YouTube and watch it. That game made me fall in love with pro football. It was a phenomenal game. And that image of Kellen Winslow Sr. being so exhausted that he had to be carried off the field basically by a couple of his teammates is something that I'll never forget. But yeah, Dallas Goedert is definitely a start this week. His numbers have not been great lately, But if you look at the total numbers of the year, like he's actually been maybe the most consistent Eagles receiver.
He's going to be great this week. I can tell you that much.
In Dallas.
Yeah,
I mean, yes. I mean, look at the numbers, 12 plus points to 4 tight ends since week 5. Goddard beat us, even though I'm wearing an Eagles jersey. It's Harold Carmichael because Jerry Jones, this is big, what to him. 7 catches back in week 1. So Goddard's a tight end that I'm playing this week.
What about TJ Hawkinson? I know you're out on all the Vikings guys, but can you trust him this week against the Packers? Okay.
I can't. I mean, single digits in 6 of his last 7 games. He's averaging like 4-ish targets a game with JJ McCarthy, but it doesn't matter who he's playing. It doesn't. I almost felt like The Rock there. It doesn't matter who he's playing. I can't play. It's the same thing with Addison. I can't play TJ Hawkinson, man. I just can't do it. And it sucks because he's a guy that people drafted to be their tight end 1, and he has not met expectations. And a lot of it is because of McCarthy.
I know that you're kind of out on Baker Mayfield this week, but what about Cade Otton? Is he somebody that you can play? I know this Rams defense is phenomenal. They have lost some guys in the secondary. Is this a good matchup for him?
Yeah, I mean, they just gave up 10 catches to AJ Barner. And the Rams have given up 9+ points to 7 tight ends, including 5 since week 5. So again, tight end's a dumpster fire. Next year, folks, either tight end premium or eliminate the position and make it an extra flex. I'm just saying, like, last week, did you see the top 12 tight ends?
It's gross every year, though, Fabs.
It's
like,
disgusting.
This is not a
That's
new
why
trend.
we need to make a change. We need to make a change, man. The wind's a change. Scorpions so greatly sung that song years ago.
This is a change that we all can believe in, right?
Hair metal, baby. So I am going with Otton this week, though. I do like him. Now, Chris Godwin, may or may not be back this week. That could change things a little bit. But right now, I'm going to be starting Cade Otton.
All right, let's talk about some players that you can move from your bench into your starting lineup and maybe even from your waiver wire to potential flex plays. We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. The NFL season is back, and honestly, there's not a better time to get in on the action than Game Time. I love going to football games. It's one of my favorite things, but getting tickets can be a hassle between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout. It's all incredibly frustrating, but that's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price that you see is the price that you pay. One of my favorite features in the app is that you can see exactly what your view is going to look like from your seats before you buy. Like, I love sitting in the end zone, but I don't want to be where I'm constantly trying to look around, the field goal post. That's why Game Time is the best. They make it fast, cheap, and less stressful than any other way that you previously purchased tickets. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that is promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket. Go download Game Time today. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Podcast. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Fabs, let's talk about some streamers, some guys that you could probably pick up from your waiver wire and put into your starting lineups. We talked about Jacoby Brissett, but is he somebody that you're starting like as a top 12 quarterback this week?
Yeah, dude, it's crazy. Number one, you would never think of Jacoby Brissett as a top 12 fantasy quarterback, and you would also never think that he would be ranked that high without Marvin Harrison, but both are true. And we talked about it early in the program, 47 to 57 last week. That's crazy, man. And he's got the Jags this week. They've allowed 5 quarterbacks to beat them for at least 20 points since week 5. So this is a really good matchup for Jacoby Brissett. And then, you mentioned Jacoby Brissett. You got to mention Michael Wilson, 185 and over 33 fantasy points last week. Now, he's not going to be that good again.
No.
But, I mean, how do you not play Michael Wilson against the Jags, who've given up the 4th most points per game, the perimeter receivers? The answer is that you do start him this week.
I want to talk about Kenneth Gainwell, but I want to give you the floor first because Gainwell is owned in, was it 17.7%?
No, that's started.
Started in 17.7% of leagues.
Yep.
last week he was phenomenal. He's had a couple of games this year, Fabs, when Jaylen Warren has been out. Like, he is a legit low-end RB1. Now, we don't know the status of Warren this week, but
Right.
honestly, I'm not sure that it matters.
Warren obviously would, he's been limited in practice. I mean, as we record this, they haven't practiced on Friday. But even if he does play, I think Gainwell's startable because there's 4 teams off. And the Bears, I mean, they've allowed 2 running backs to beat them for 19 plus points since week 8. I think Gainwell's a flex starter. And if Warren's out, I think Gainwell's an RB2 and a pretty darn good one at that.
Well, and we should mention last week against the Bengals, Jaylen Warren got banged up. Mike Tomlin said that Warren was available to go back in the game, and they just stuck with Gainwell because Tomlin said he was having a really good game and he was a better fit. Chicago is likely going to be without their top 3 linebackers in this game, including Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards. And if Rodgers does play this game, I can't believe that he's going to be wanting to hold onto the ball for very long. It would not surprise me at all, Fabs, if this is a game where Gainwell catches 7 passes for 50 yards and gets into the end zone once. Right there makes him a guy that you have to start.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. He is definitely one of those streamable assets. And again, he could be floating around out there on waiver wire. Probably not in the competitive leagues, but in some other leagues, he could be out there.
Especially, shorter bench leagues or smaller leagues. I think he is out there.
Yep.
What about Emmanuel Wilson, the Packers running back against the Vikings? Again, we don't know the status of Josh Jacobs. He did practice in a limited fashion on Thursday. But even if Jacobs plays, I don't think Wilson's a bad flex play because so many teams are on bye, and we know that Jacobs won't be 100%.
Right. And it's funny, too, because Jacobs is yet another player who's gotten hurt on that horrible turf at MetLife. And, that I don't know that was a big enough story. It should have been a little bit bigger because they got to do something with that playing service. But yeah, Wilson should at least be owned right now, especially if you have Jacobs, just in case Jacobs is out. Yeah, but regardless, I think even if Jacobs is active, this could be a situation where they're getting Wilson more involved. Like, Jacobs didn't have any ligament damage or anything like that. He just bruised the crap out of his knee. Like it's a knee contusion.
And those can just zap some of your explosiveness. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jacobs tries to play, but you get 3 carries into the game and it's okay, he can't be effective.
Think about having a big egg on your kneecap, or a big egg, and trying to run with that thing. So we'll see as of Sunday and when we get the inactives. But for right now, Wilson's on the radar.
All right, last one. This Atlanta offense.
I know.
No Drake London, no Michael Penix. I mean, Kyle Pitts is there, but is there anybody else in the passing game that you feel comfortable starting?
I begrudgingly give you Darnell Mooney. Okay. And I say begrudgingly because I remember the last time London was out and I thought Mooney was worth a look and he stunk. But I mean, the Saints have allowed the 7th most points to perimeter receivers since week 8. If you're desperate, and a lot of people are, you can roll with Mooney this week. He has been a shell of the player who was very good last year. In fact, if you look back at the numbers, and injuries have been part to do with it. But I mean, Atlanta, outside of Bijan, and I'm sure even Tyler Algier will get a little bit more burn this week too. Maybe you can flex him as well because they lack, the reliable options in the passing game. Kyle Pitts is going to get a lot of targets, and you would think that Darnell Mooney would get targeted as well. I don't think we're going to see. You would think, yes. So, just playing the numbers game. He's a player that if you're desperate and you need a flex starter this week, you could roll the dice. That's what streamers are.
Yeah, exactly. I think the only thing that concerns me is if Kirk Cousins is just as washed as we think he is, maybe he's not able to get the ball to the perimeter where Darnell Mooney plays. But if you're Zach Robinson and you're the Falcons OC, you should move Mooney around, get him some of these layup touches to just get him going. But we'll see. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the show on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Fabs on Twitter at Michael_Fabiano. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. Enjoy week 12, and we'll see you right back here on Monday.